What looked like a dream beginning for the WNBA quickly turned into something far more complicated. When Caitlin Clark stepped into the league, she wasn't just another rookie. She was a once-in-a-generation phenomenon whose arrival instantly rewired the sports landscape. Overnight, arenas that spent years begging for attendance were suddenly packed wall to wall. Fans lined up hours before tip-off just to catch a glimpse of a player who had already become a cultural force before playing a single professional minute. Every game she touched exploded across social media, turning regular season matchups into national events. On paper, it should have been the smoothest victory the WNBA ever experienced. But beneath all that hype was a reality nobody wanted to admit. With every highlight Clark produced, a storm was quietly forming behind the scenes. Much of the league wasn't prepared for a rookie who could eclipse entire franchises in attention, revenue, and influence. And almost immediately, the pressure of that imbalance started boiling over on the court. What should have been a celebration of talent quickly turned into a series of rough collisions, hard contact, and uncomfortably personal physical play. From her first week in the league, it became obvious that Clark wasn't just being guarded. She was being tested, pushed, and sometimes outright targeted. That extra physicality didn't happen in a vacuum. Fans and analysts watched as she absorbed hits that felt less like competitive intensity and more like messages. Every shove, every hip check, every heavy foul triggered new conversations online. Was this normal rookie treatment? Or was the league letting something more hostile slip through? Clips went viral almost daily, and every viral moment added fuel to a narrative that the WNBA wasn't fully prepared to handle. Clark became the lightning rod for a deeper tension, one that had been building long before she ever arrived. Veteran players were suddenly placed under a microscope. Some insisted the aggression was simply part of the culture, that every rookie goes through a rough initiation. Others hinted that the resentment ran deeper. Clark represented a level of fame that many longtime players never received, despite years of grinding under far less glamorous conditions. The jealousy, the pride, the competitive fire, it all mixed into something messy and impossible to ignore. Instead of being welcomed as the rising tide that could lift the entire league, Clark found herself navigating a battleground she never asked for. And the more she succeeded, the more intense the spotlight became. Every foul turned into a national debate. Every argument on the floor became a headline. The WNBA was suddenly being discussed not just by sports fans, but by people who had never watched a game until Clark arrived. That kind of attention can be a blessing if handled correctly, but if mishandled, it can expose cracks that were never meant to see daylight. And for the WNBA, those cracks were widening faster than anyone expected. What should have been the most promising moment in league history became the moment the public realized something wasn't working. Clark's presence didn't just magnify the league's growth, it magnified its vulnerabilities. The infrastructure wasn't ready. The culture wasn't aligned. And the leadership didn't respond quickly enough to shape the narrative before it spiraled. Clark came in to play basketball. Instead, she walked into the center of a cultural shift the league never prepared for. For most of the season, WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert tried to keep her usual calm, polished tone. Measured statements, careful phrasing, and a corporate steadiness meant to keep the league's public image stable. But as the conversations around Caitlin Clark grew louder, sharper, and harder to control, maintaining that polished facade became impossible. The pressure reached a point where even Engelbert couldn't ignore what everyone else already knew. The league was overwhelmed. Then came the moment that shifted everything. In a rare departure from her standard public messaging, Engelbert admitted something she had never come close to saying before, that the WNBA simply wasn't prepared for the magnitude of attention surrounding Clark. Her words weren't dramatic, but the meaning behind them hit like an earthquake. It was the first real acknowledgement from the top that the league's systems, protocols, and media strategy failed to match the scale of Clark's influence. For years, the WNBA had operated at a steady, manageable pace. Growth was consistent, but slow. Attention fluctuated. Coverage came in waves. The league was accustomed to pushing for visibility, not defending itself from overwhelming exposure. Clark flipped that rhythm instantly. Instead of fighting to be noticed, the WNBA suddenly had to manage a tidal wave of national interest, and it wasn't ready. Engelbert's admission revealed an uncomfortable truth. The league's internal structure was built for the WNBA of the past, not the WNBA of now. The sudden surge in ratings and social engagement should have been a celebration, but it quickly became a stress test the league failed. The media narrative spun faster than leadership could redirect it. Physical play escalated faster than officials could adjust. Fan debates erupted faster than the league could respond. Every delay, every half measure, every vague deflection made the league look reactive instead of proactive. And that is where the real problems surfaced. In professional sports, perception matters almost as much as performance. When a league appears unsure of itself, fans see it. Players feel it. Sponsors sense it. And opportunists, those watching from the outside, see weakness to exploit. Engelbert's comment wasn't just a confession of being unprepared. It was a signal, intentional or not, that the WNBA was vulnerable at a time when stability mattered most. Instead of controlling the story, the league watched it spin out of its hands. Clips of Clark taking hard hits circulated without strong public guidance from leadership. Debates about veteran resentment or league favoritism exploded without firm clarification. The perception grew that Clark wasn't being adequately protected. Not physically, not culturally, not publicly. Whether that perception was fair or not didn't even matter. What mattered was that the league let the narrative form before shaping it themselves. And the damage from that hesitation stretched far beyond a handful of viral moments. It painted the WNBA as unprepared for its own success. It raised doubts about whether the league could support a superstar capable of shifting the entire sports ecosystem. Most importantly, it exposed the exact kind of instability that invites outside forces to step in and build something stronger, richer, and more strategic. Engelbert's admission was meant to be a moment of transparency. Instead, it became the loudest confirmation yet that the WNBA had been caught off guard by the very future it had fought so hard to reach. Clark arrived ready to launch women's basketball into a new era, but the league wasn't structurally ready to handle the weight of that moment. And once the public could see that vulnerability, others saw it too, especially the kinds of investors who search for industries on the brink of transformation. If the tension around Caitlin Clark revealed anything, it was how fragile the WNBA's financial foundation truly is. For decades, the league operated under a simple but uncomfortable truth. Players weren't paid anywhere near what their talent, visibility, or market impact deserved. It was an accepted part of the system, justified by the league's limited revenue and its slow, underfunded growth. But when Clark walked through the door and transformed the league's numbers overnight, that long-ignored issue became impossible to hide. Clark generated millions in ticket sales, merchandise, sponsorships, and broadcast value within weeks. Entire arenas sold out purely because she was visiting. TV networks promoted her games with the urgency usually reserved for playoff matchups. Social engagement skyrocketed. And yet, despite all this unprecedented energy, her official salary sat at around just $76,000. For a player driving more attention than most franchises had seen in their entire history, the contrast was jarring. Even the league's maximum salary, roughly $250,000 for its most accomplished veterans, looked tiny in comparison to the value these players actually create. This wasn't simply a pay gap. It was a structural disconnect between contribution and compensation, a legacy of years spent underinvesting in women's sports. The league insisted that salaries reflected actual revenue, and while that was mathematically true, it ignored a much bigger question. If a single rookie could triple media coverage and break every attendance metric, why hadn't the league positioned itself to capitalize financially? The uncomfortable reality is that WNBA players have known for years that their labor was undervalued. It's why so many spent their off-seasons overseas, grinding through additional seasons with exhausting travel schedules and little rest. In Russia, Turkey, China, and Europe, clubs routinely paid American stars 5 to 10 times their WNBA salary. For some players, international teams became their primary source of income, not the WNBA. It was an open secret that the best women's basketball careers were often financially secured outside the United States. But that overseas model came with its own risks: injuries, burnout, time away from family, unpredictable political environments, and sometimes dangerous conditions. The Brittany Griner situation was the clearest example of how vulnerable players became when forced to chase financial stability across the globe. Her detention in Russia didn't just reveal international risk, It exposed how deeply the economic imbalance affected the lives of WNBA athletes. And now, with the league gaining more attention than ever before, the mismatch between value and salary has never been more visible. Fans questioned how someone as impactful as Clark could earn so little. Analysts pointed out that major corporations, not the league itself, provided the bulk of her income through endorsement deals. Critics argued that the WNBA had failed to modernize quickly enough to meet the moment. That criticism hit harder because it was true. The league's infrastructure still resembled a system built for minimal revenue and localized attention. It wasn't designed for national superstars. It wasn't designed for viral phenomena. And it definitely wasn't designed for competition from entities with billions in free capital and a strategic interest in dominating new markets. The WNBA's financial limitations weren't a minor flaw, they were the crack in the foundation that everyone had quietly worked around. But once Clark arrived, that crack became a spotlighted weakness. And in the world of global sports, a weakness that big doesn't stay unnoticed for long. Because while the WNBA was struggling to catch up with its own sudden success, powerful forces overseas were already watching and preparing to rewrite the entire structure of women's basketball. While the WNBA was still trying to stabilize itself under the weight of sudden mainstream attention, another storyline began rising quietly in the background. One far more disruptive than a few viral arguments or on-court controversies. It started as whispers, then as speculative reports, then as unnamed sources claiming that a group with seemingly unlimited resources was preparing to step directly into the world of women's basketball. And the group behind it. The Saudi Public Investment Fund, known for its massive sports investments and its ability to reshape entire industries almost overnight. To understand the scale of this potential move, you have to understand the PIF strategy. This isn't a typical investor searching for quick profits. This is a sovereign wealth fund controlling hundreds of billions of dollars, with a long-term mission to increase global influence through high-impact entertainment projects. They don't dip their toes into an industry, they buy the ocean. They did it with soccer, backing clubs and tournaments until the sport began leaning toward their orbit. They did it with Formula One, professional boxing, esports, and high-end entertainment ventures. And perhaps their most infamous disruption came when they created LIV Golf, a league that shattered the traditional PGA system by offering life-changing contracts to the world's top players. Now, according to growing speculation, the same playbook is being prepared for women's basketball. The rumored plan is brutally simple. Build a rival league from scratch with unmatched funding, then lure top WNBA players by offering them money so large that refusing becomes nearly impossible. Not small raises, not incremental improvements, transformational wealth. Salaries that exceed not just WNBA standards, but global standards. Contracts that would rewrite what female basketball athletes can earn in a single season. Sources claim the proposed figures include $5 million annually for Caitlin Clark, $3 million plus equity for players like Sophie Cunningham, even higher offers for superstars such as Aya Wilson, Breanna Stewart, and Sabrina Ionescu. Signing bonuses that exceed the entire career earnings of many WNBA players combined. This isn't competition. It's a takeover strategy. The PIF understands something the WNBA has been reluctant to confront. Players aren't just athletes, they're assets whose value is defined by the league that controls them. If a new league acquires even 5 or 6 of the biggest names, the fans will follow, sponsors will follow, and broadcast partners will follow. The WNBA's entire cultural momentum depends heavily on its stars, and those stars could be bought away in a single off-season. That's exactly how LIV Golf exploded. Overnight, it pulled major champions away from the PGA Tour by offering them contracts worth more than they could earn in a decade. Once those first few big names crossed the line, everything changed. Prestige didn't protect the PGA. Legacy didn't protect it. Tradition didn't protect it. Money rewrote the entire hierarchy of the sport. Now imagine that same power being aimed at a league where salaries are already disproportionately low, where players have long accepted sacrifices because there were no alternatives, where frustration about pay and treatment has simmered for years. In that context, the Saudi proposal isn't just enticing, it's destabilizing. The rumors gained traction because they made sense. Women's basketball is growing faster than almost any other sport in the world. Its audience is young, engaged, and expanding rapidly. The league is filled with charismatic, marketable stars with massive influence online. And most importantly, the WNBA has a structural weakness that money alone could overpower. Financial limitations that cannot be fixed quickly. A billion-dollar rival league wouldn't need decades to build credibility. It could buy credibility the moment the contracts are offered. And if those offers reach the public, the entire landscape of women's basketball could shift in a single season. Not gradually, not subtly, instantly. What began as whispers is now an international storyline, and every new report adds more fuel to the idea that a Saudi-backed shadow league is less of a rumor and more of a looming possibility. Among all the players mentioned in the swirling rumors, one name kept reappearing with unusual consistency: Sophie Cunningham. At first, her inclusion in the speculation surprised some fans. She isn't the top scorer in the league, nor is she the biggest household name. But that's exactly why her name mattered, because Cunningham represents a very specific type of player, the type a new league would strategically target as its first major signing. Cunningham brings something rare to the WNBA landscape. On the court, she's tough, energetic, emotional, and unafraid to challenge anyone standing in front of her. Off the court, she's a media presence with a recognizable personality, a growing online following, and a style that draws attention even among casual fans. She's marketable, charismatic, and authentic in a way that connects across demographics. In simple terms, she's memorable, not just to basketball fans, but to people who enjoy personalities as much as they enjoy performance. And that's exactly what a rival league would need in its early stages. Someone who can bring competitive credibility and viral relevance. Someone who can bridge the gap between basketball purists and fans who follow personalities. Someone who represents the sport, but also represents entertainment. Cunningham fits that mold perfectly. The rumors suggested she was approached with a type of contract the WNBA could never match. One that didn't just offer a salary but offered a stake in the league's identity. Multi-million-dollar pay. Equity options. Guaranteed marketing deals. A chance not just to play, but to help build a new sports empire. Whether those rumors are exaggerated or accurate, the idea alone shook the WNBA conversation. Because if a player like Cunningham made the jump, it wouldn't be a small ripple. It would be a shockwave. She wouldn't be leaving the league as its MVP or its top scorer. She would be leaving as the first domino. And that's what makes her so important. A superstar leaving creates headlines. But a mid-star leaving, someone who sits right in the heart of the league's personality ecosystem, creates change. It signals to every other player that the door is open, the checks are real, and the opportunity isn't just for the most elite athletes. Imagine the WNBA locker rooms in that scenario. Imagine players sitting beside teammates who suddenly have multi-million-dollar offers waiting for them. Imagine the tension of knowing someone on your roster could quadruple their income by stepping into a brand new league. The WNBA has always prided itself on its collective identity. The idea of unity, sisterhood, shared struggles, and shared victories. But money of this magnitude doesn't slide in quietly. It fractures bonds, forces difficult conversations, and introduces decisions that players never expected to face. For veterans who spent over a decade grinding for modest pay, watching younger or more marketable players leap into another league with financial security could create resentment. For rookies, it could create confusion, stay loyal, or chase the future. And for stars like Clark, Aya Wilson, or Sabrina Ionescu, it could create leverage unlike anything the WNBA has ever seen. Cunningham's rumored offer became a symbol. It wasn't just about one player. It was about the possibility of players being valued at levels they had only dreamed of. It was about the chance to escape a structure that limited their earnings and confined their careers to a narrow financial window. It was about liberation, at least financially, and that is a powerful motivator in any profession. And once that symbol took hold, it no longer mattered whether the exact figures were true. The idea was enough to change the tone of conversations inside and outside the league. Suddenly, every agent was listening more closely. Every player was evaluating her future more carefully. Every franchise was worrying about what might happen if star players vanished into a new system with deeper pockets and broader ambition. Cunningham might not be the league's leading scorer, but she represents something far more valuable to a rival league: a bridge. A bridge between eras. A bridge between leagues. A bridge between opportunity and uncertainty. And if she ever decided to cross that bridge, she wouldn't be walking alone. She would be leading the way. As the possibility of a Saudi-backed women's basketball league grew louder, the conversation shifted from money and opportunity to something far more complicated. Suddenly, the issue wasn't just whether players would switch leagues, it was whether they should. Because behind the billion-dollar offers and glamorous promises lies a dilemma that no athlete can ignore: the moral weight of partnering with a system whose values do not align with the freedoms those players depend on. Saudi Arabia's government has spent years attempting to reshape its global reputation through entertainment, sports, tourism, and major cultural investments. This strategy, often labeled sportswashing, seeks to soften international criticism by associating the nation with beloved athletes, globally admired teams, and high-profile events. And while some industries can absorb that moral complexity quietly, women's sports cannot. Not when the athletes themselves represent empowerment, independence, and visibility. Values that conflict sharply with Saudi Arabia's long-standing restrictions on women. This is where the dilemma becomes heavier. The same country now rumored to offer female basketball players multi-million-dollar contracts only recently granted women the right to drive. A place where male guardianship laws still shape women's autonomy. A place where women's rights activists have faced punishment simply for demanding basic freedoms. For athletes who built their careers in leagues that champion equality and representation, the contradiction is impossible to ignore. Yet at the same time, the offers on the table, if real, are the kind of financial lifelines that can change entire families' futures. We're not talking about small raises or modest bonuses. These are numbers that can wipe out debt, create generational wealth, and provide security long after retirement. For many players who spent years juggling multiple seasons, sacrificing rest, and grinding for salaries that barely reflect their worth, the idea of turning down that kind of money feels like an unfair demand. And that's where the tension explodes. Because both sides of the argument are valid. Some fans argue that athletes should refuse on principle, that accepting money from a government with a controversial human rights record makes them complicit. They insist the moral stance matters more than the paycheck. Others argue that the burden shouldn't fall on the athletes at all, that expecting them to ignore life-changing money for geopolitical reasons is unreasonable. These players didn't create the global system. They didn't build the conditions that limited their earnings for decades. Why should they sacrifice themselves again? The debate mirrors what happened with LIV Golf. When the Saudi-funded league first appeared, many PGA Tour players condemned it publicly, refusing the money and calling the offers unethical. But as the contracts grew larger, those firm moral stances began to crack. One by one, players crossed over, often for sums that doubled or tripled their career earnings. The public judged them, but in the end, most people understood the truth. Everyone has a breaking point, especially when the financial difference is measured in millions. Women's basketball faces an even more intense version of that decision. Unlike male golfers, WNBA players have spent decades fighting for basic respect, fair pay, safe working conditions, and visibility. Many have never had the chance to earn even a fraction of what their male counterparts make. So the question becomes painfully complicated. Is it fair to ask underpaid athletes to take a moral stand that the rest of the sports world rarely takes? Consider the personal dimension. A player with aging parents, student loans, or a short athletic window might see the Saudi League not as an ethical dilemma, but as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A way to secure stability for their family. A way to retire without financial anxiety. A way to be paid what the world should have paid them years ago. But on the other side is the cultural cost. A decision that could reshape how fans view women's sports. A move that could anger communities who see the WNBA as more than entertainment, who see it as a symbol of progress. A choice that could fracture the unity players built over years of shared struggle. No matter which direction players lean, there is no clean outcome. Every option comes with consequences. Every decision will draw criticism from one side and understanding from the other. This isn't a simple question of loyalty or ambition. It's a collision between moral ideals and financial realities, between personal survival and global ethics. The truth is, players never asked to be placed at the center of such a massive geopolitical conflict. They wanted to play basketball, build careers, and support their families. But when billion-dollar interests collide with underpaid talent, the athletes become the fulcrum of a much larger system, one they didn't choose to be part of. And the moment Saudi money entered the conversation, the future of women's basketball became more than just a sports story. It became a moral crossroads, one where every choice carries weight far beyond the court. If even a handful of WNBA players accepted offers from a Saudi-backed league, the impact wouldn't be slow, subtle, or easy to manage. It would be immediate and seismic. Professional sports are built on star power, and women's basketball is no exception. The league's growth, visibility, and cultural momentum depend heavily on the names people follow, the storylines fans invest in, and the personalities that keep audiences engaged. Removing those stars doesn't just weaken the product. It rewrites the entire hierarchy of the sport. Imagine the scenario. Caitlin Clark receives a multi-million-dollar offer. Aya Wilson is approached next. Then Brianna Stewart. Then Sabrina Ionescu. Even players who aren't considered superstars by traditional metrics, like Sophie Cunningham, could become foundational pieces of a new league's marketing push. Suddenly, the WNBA isn't just losing players. It's losing identity, losing influence, losing the heartbeat of the sport. Broadcast networks that invested heavily in Clark's games would shift their attention to wherever the biggest stars are playing. Sponsors who rely on visibility, engagement, and cultural alignment would follow the audience. Social media conversations, the lifeblood of modern sports, would migrate instantly to the league where the stars reside. And fans who spent years supporting the WNBA might find themselves torn between loyalty to the league and loyalty to the athletes they love. The WNBA's struggle becomes even more complicated when you consider its already fragile revenue model. Teams depend on star-driven attendance to keep arenas full. They depend on national broadcasts to justify their partnerships. They depend on merchandise sales that explode when players like Clark emerge. If those players leave, the financial ecosystem collapses faster than leadership could possibly rebuild it. The league's expansion plans, its push for charter flights, its efforts to negotiate stronger broadcast deals, every initiative depends on rising popularity. And that popularity is tied directly to the players at the center of the conversation. Remove them, and all the progress of the last 5 years evaporates. The WNBA isn't supported by decades of deep-rooted tradition like the NBA or NFL. It doesn't have billions in financial reserves. Its stability is tied to momentum, and momentum is tied to its stars. But what if players choose to stay? What if they collectively decide that the cultural stakes are too high and reject the Saudi offers? In that scenario, the WNBA holds onto its identity, emerging stronger through unity. Players reaffirm their commitment to building something sustainable in the United States. Fans rally behind a league that stands for ethics, loyalty, and long-term progress. That outcome would be unprecedented, a collective refusal to chase massive money in favor of preserving the sport's integrity. Yet even that scenario comes with challenges. Players staying doesn't magically fix the pay disparity. It doesn't eliminate the frustration of low salaries. It doesn't remove the structural limitations that forced players overseas for extra income. It simply delays the next time a financially powerful competitor comes knocking. And in a global sports economy fueled by billionaire investors, that next knock is almost guaranteed. The WNBA stands at a crossroads where every direction presents a different risk. If players leave, the league could enter a downward spiral. If players stay, the pressure to raise salaries and improve working conditions intensifies immediately. If the WNBA tries to compete financially, it risks overextending its resources. And if it refuses to compete, it risks losing players who simply want to be paid what they're worth. Even the locker room dynamics would change. Conversations that once centered on matchups and strategy would shift to contracts, offers, and futures. Some players would feel stuck between loyalty and survival. Others might resent teammates who choose to leave, or choose to stay. The equality the WNBA prides itself on could fracture under the weight of opportunity. What makes this moment so unsettling is that the WNBA has never faced competition like this before. For decades, it operated as the only elite women's basketball option in North America. That monopoly allowed it to dictate salaries, schedules, and expectations. But monopolies only survive as long as no one has the resources or motivation to build an alternative. Now, someone does. And unlike previous overseas leagues, a Saudi-backed alternative wouldn't just offer higher pay, it would offer structure, prestige, marketing power, and a global spotlight. The kind of environment athletes crave. The kind of environment the WNBA has been slowly building toward but hasn't fully reached. If top players walk away, the league doesn't just lose talent. It loses leverage. It loses negotiating power. It loses relevance. And once relevance fades, rebuilding it becomes almost impossible. This is the scenario looming over the WNBA. A future where its stars become commodities in a global bidding war, and the league that nurtured them finds itself battling for survival. The next decisions made by players, agents, and league leadership will determine whether women's basketball enters a golden era, or fractures into competing worlds. As the dust settles on the chaos surrounding the WNBA, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The league is standing in the most critical moment of its entire existence. Everything that has happened, the rise of Caitlin Clark, the tensions between veterans and rookies, the commissioner's admission of unpreparedness, the exposure of long-standing financial issues, and the sudden appearance of billion-dollar foreign interest, has led to a single crossroads. What happens next will determine not just the next season, but the next decade. Maybe the next generation. Women's basketball has never been more visible, never been more profitable, never been more culturally powerful. Millions of new fans are watching, debating, posting, buying tickets, and investing emotionally in the sport. This should be the moment the league builds something unshakable, a foundation strong enough to carry the sport into a future where female athletes are valued at levels they've earned but haven't yet received. Instead, the league's future hangs on decisions that are far more delicate than anyone expected. For players, the question is deeply personal. Do they stay loyal to the league that gave them a platform, even if the compensation doesn't reflect the demand they generate? Do they turn away from offers that could secure their families for life, knowing those opportunities may never come again? Or do they embrace the chance to redefine their financial worth, even if it means partnering with a system whose values clash with what they fought for? There is no easy answer. The WNBA was built on unity, activism, and collective strength. For decades, players championed social causes, pushed for equality, and stood firm when the league had little more than heart and hope to offer. That shared mission became the backbone of the sport. But unity is hard to maintain when real, life-altering money enters the equation. A player choosing the bigger paycheck isn't choosing greed. They're choosing financial survival in a career that can end with a single injury. A player choosing loyalty isn't resisting progress. They're choosing the legacy of the league they helped build. For the WNBA itself, the question is even bigger. Can the league innovate fast enough to keep its stars? Can it secure partnerships strong enough to raise player salaries meaningfully? Can it modernize its infrastructure to match the magnitude of the moment? Or will it continue losing ground to organizations with resources the league can't possibly match? The league's leadership has to decide whether it will protect its future with bold action or risk letting outside forces rewrite the entire power structure. The recent surge in attention has shown that the demand is there. The fans are there. The cultural momentum is there. But momentum means nothing without long-term stability. And stability requires investment, innovation, and courage from the very top. For fans, this moment matters just as much. The future of women's basketball depends on the attention, support, and engagement of the people watching. Fans have more power now than ever before. Every ticket sold, every broadcast viewed, every jersey purchased, every discussion online pushes the league forward. If the WNBA is going to survive this crossroads, it will be because the people who love the sport continue to elevate it. But the biggest question of all, the one that will shape everything, is simple. Can the WNBA evolve fast enough to keep up with its own success? Or will this golden era become the turning point where the league lost control of its future? No one knows the answer yet. The next few seasons will tell the story. They'll reveal whether the WNBA becomes the stable, thriving empire fans have dreamed of, or whether it fractures under the pressure of global competition. What happens next will be remembered for years, because this isn't just a sports decision. It's a defining moment for women's athletics worldwide. And as fans, viewers, creators, and supporters, we're watching history unfold in real time. If you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly someone who cares about the real story behind women's basketball, its growth, its challenges, and the massive shift happening right now. And honestly, content like this only reaches more people when viewers like you help push it out into the algorithm. So if you found this breakdown insightful, take just a moment to subscribe to the channel. It helps the system know you want more deep dive content like this, and it directly supports the creation of long-form analysis that most channels don't take the time to produce. Also, like the video if it brought you value, and drop a comment below telling me your thoughts. Do you think players will leave the WNBA if the Saudi League becomes real? Do you think the league can survive it? I read every comment, and your perspective actually shapes what I cover next. Your support genuinely makes a difference, and together, we can grow this channel into one of the most informed and impactful spaces for women's basketball content on YouTube.